Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments. I love knowing who's here with me tonight. And if you've ever been the one in your family who had to fight for everything while watching someone else get handed the world, this story is for you. My parents gave my brother a $200,000 down payment on a house the summer I turned 29. They handed him the check at a backyard barbecue, in front of aunts and uncles and neighbors I'd known my whole life, with my father clapping my brother on the shoulder and saying, "This is what we do for family. We set you up right." I was standing 6 feet away, holding a paper plate with a hot dog I hadn't taken a single bite of. Nobody looked at me. Not my mother. Not my father. Not even my brother, who I had driven 4 hours to be there that day. 3 weeks before that barbecue, I had asked my mother quietly, privately, just the two of us in her kitchen, whether there was any possibility of help. Not $200,000? Not even close. I had found a small property in Clarksville, a duplex that needed work but had real potential, and the gap in my financing was $22,000. I laid it all out for her on my laptop. The numbers, the projections, the rental income I'd calculated. I had prepared for that conversation the way I prepared for everything thoroughly, carefully, with every possible objection already considered and answered. She looked at the screen for a long moment, and then she looked at me, and she said, "Claire, you've always been the one who figures things out on your own. That's your gift. We don't worry about you." I nodded. I closed my laptop. I thanked her for the coffee and I drove home. I told myself it was fine. I had been telling myself it was fine for about 15 years at that point, so I was practiced at it. I had gotten very good at making peace with things that were not actually peaceful, at reframing disappointments as lessons, at finding the angle from which an absence could look like a kind of freedom. I was 30 years old and I had already spent most of my adult life doing that particular emotional math, and I was tired of it in a way I hadn't yet let myself fully admit. My brother's name is Daniel. He is 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the sun that our family orbited. Not because he was cruel. Daniel has never been cruel. He is easy and warm and he laughs at all the right moments, and my parents have always found that to be enough. He graduated college in 5 years instead of 4, and my parents said he was finding himself. I graduated in 3.5, and my mother said, "Just make sure you don't burn out, sweetheart." He moved back home twice in his 20s. They converted the garage into an apartment for him the second time. When I moved to a city 4 hours away to take a job that actually had a future, my father said, "I hope you know what you're giving up." I knew. I was giving up a bedroom in a house where I had never quite fit. I was giving up Sunday dinners where the conversation always found its way back to Daniel, his job prospects, his girlfriend, his fantasy football league. I was giving up the particular exhaustion of being in a room full of people who loved me, in theory, but never seemed especially curious about who I actually was. What I was getting was a 600-square-foot apartment and a job as a junior analyst at a commercial real estate firm called Hartwell Partners. It was not glamorous. I ate a lot of pasta that first year. I learned to read financial models the way some people learn a second language badly at first, and then all at once. My manager, a woman named Rosa who had built her career from nothing in a city that did not make things easy, told me in my first performance review that I had the kind of attention to detail that was either going to make me very successful or drive me completely insane. She said it like it was a compliment, and I decided to take it as one. I stayed late. I came in early. I took on the projects that nobody else wanted because they were complicated or unglamorous or required working with clients who were difficult. I got good at difficult. I got good at finding value in things that other people had written off. I learned that most undervalued things are not undervalued because they are actually worthless. They are undervalued because the people looking at them don't have the patience or the knowledge to see what they could become. That insight, I would later realize, applied to a great deal more than real estate. That, I would eventually understand, was the thing my parents had accidentally given me. Not support, not a safety net, not a check at a backyard barbecue. They had given me the absolute certainty that no one was coming to rescue me, and so I had better figure out how to rescue myself. It took me a long time to feel grateful for that. I'm getting ahead of myself. The summer of the barbecue, I was 29 years old. I had been at Hartwell for almost 4 years, and I had just been passed over for a promotion that I had spent 8 months working toward. The person who got it instead was a man named Greg, who had been at the firm for 2 years, and whose primary qualification, as far as I could tell, was that he went to the same college as two of the senior partners. I sat in the parking garage of our office building for 20 minutes after I got the news. Not crying, just sitting, staring at the concrete wall in front of my car, and doing that thing I did where I tried to decide whether I was angry or just tired. I was both. I was so tired. I drove to my parents' house that weekend because Daniel's celebration was happening and I had already said I was coming. I was not going to be the one who didn't show up. I had spent my whole life showing up. My Aunt Margaret hugged me at the gate and asked how the work thing was going, and I said fine. And she said that Daniel was just so excited about the house. And did I know it had 4 bedrooms? 4 bedrooms. I said that was wonderful and I meant it, partly. I meant that it was wonderful in the abstract way that other people's good fortune can be wonderful when it has nothing to do with you. And then my father gave the speech and handed my brother the check. And I stood there with my paper plate, and I understood not for the first time, but more completely than I ever had before, that this was simply the way it was. It was not going to change. My parents were not one day going to see me differently. There was no version of events in which I became the child they worried about, the one they wanted to cushion from the world. I was the one who figured things out on her own. That was my gift. I put the paper plate down on a table, and I went inside and I sat on the edge of the bathtub in my parents' guest bathroom for about 4 minutes, and I had a quiet but very complete breakdown that I do not regret. And then I washed my face and I went back outside and I ate the hot dog and I stayed until it was acceptable to leave. I drove 4 hours home. I did not turn on the radio. I thought the whole way. By the time I got back to my apartment, something had shifted. I was not sure what to call it then, but I would eventually call it clarity. I was 29 years old, and I was tired of waiting for permission. I was tired of building someone else's firm and watching opportunities go to people who had connections I would never have. I had been the one who figured things out on her own for my entire life, and maybe it was time to actually use that. Not just to survive, not just to get by, but to build something that was genuinely, completely mine. I had $41,000 in savings. I had spent 3.5 years analyzing commercial real estate deals, and I understood genuinely, deeply understood how to identify undervalued properties and what it took to turn them around. I had a contact named Perry who was a contractor and had become something like a friend through 2 deals I'd sourced for Hartwell. And I had a very particular kind of anger that, once I stopped trying to push it down, turned out to be an excellent source of fuel. I gave my notice 8 weeks later. My mother called when she heard, "Claire," she said, in the voice she used when she was trying to sound calm and not quite managing it. "Are you sure you've thought this through?" "The economy. I've thought it through," I said. "Daniel is just getting settled, and we're not in a position to." "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I just wanted you to know." There was a pause. "You've always been so independent," she said. And this time I heard it differently than I ever had before. I heard it as what it was. Not a compliment. Not an observation. An excuse. A way of explaining to herself why she had never had to show up for me the way she showed up for my brother. Because I didn't need it. Because I figured things out. Because I was the capable one. The self-sufficient one. And wasn't that a wonderful thing to be? "Yes," I said. "I have." We hung up. I sat in my apartment and I let myself feel every bit of what I was feeling, and then I made a list. The duplex in Clarksville was gone. Someone else had bought it 6 weeks after I'd looked into it. But I had been watching the market for months by then, and I had identified 3 other properties in a corridor 2 hours south of the city that were significantly undervalued, for reasons that were fixable, a zoning change that hadn't been fully absorbed into pricing, an area that was beginning to attract light commercial development, landlords who were tired and priced to move. I reached out to Perry and we drove down on a Saturday and walked through all 3. The one we both felt immediately was a 4-unit building on a corner lot in a town called Clearhaven. It needed a new roof, updated electrical, and about 6 weeks of serious cosmetic work. The owner was an elderly man who had inherited it from his own father and who had, very clearly, not been inside it in at least 2 years. Perry and I stood in the parking lot afterward and he said, "I can do the roof and electrical for under 22. Cosmetic, another 8. You're looking at 30 to make this thing shine." I had 41. I made an offer the following Tuesday. I will not pretend the next 14 months were easy, because they were not. I was running out of my own savings and generating just enough income from the 2 units that were rentable during renovation to keep me from going under. I was managing Perry's crew and fielding tenant calls and driving down to Millhaven twice a week and doing my own books and trying, simultaneously, to line up my next acquisition before this one was finished so that I would not lose momentum. I was operating on about 5 hours of sleep and an amount of coffee that a reasonable person would find alarming. There were nights more than I would like to admit when I lay awake in my apartment and ran the numbers in my head and could not make them come out in a way that felt safe. There were mornings when I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold, and I thought about what it would mean to call someone and say that I needed help. And every single time I thought about it, I realized there was no one to call. Not because people didn't care about me, but because I had never built the habit of asking, and the people I would have asked had spent years telling me I didn't need to. So I kept going. Not because I wasn't scared, but because stopping was not actually an option I was willing to take. I had no one in my family to call. My mother checked in occasionally in a way that felt more like surveillance than support, asking questions that were really just looking for evidence that I was struggling, that I had been wrong to try this. I could hear the shape of what she wanted to say every time we talked. You see? This is why we worried. This is why it's different with Daniel. She never said it, but it was there. My father called once, around the 8-month mark, when one of my tenants had given notice and I had a vacancy that was costing me money. He said he'd heard from my mother that things were hard. He asked if I wanted to come home for a weekend, get some rest. I said I was fine. He said, "You know we believe in you, Claire Bear." He had called me that since I was 4. I almost said something real. Instead, I said thank you and I told him I had to go take a contractor's call, which was true. What I had, instead of my family, was Rosa. I had stayed in touch with her after leaving Hartwell. She was not surprised when I called to tell her I'd quit. "I was wondering when," she said. She became the person I called when I needed someone to tell me if my logic was sound, when I needed someone to push back on a decision without an agenda, when I needed someone to say this is hard but you are not wrong without making it about themselves. She said it more than once. I needed to hear it more than once. The Millhaven building turned cash flow positive in month 14. I refinanced, pulled out equity, and used it as the down payment on a second building, a 6-unit in a neighboring town that was further along and needed less work. By the time that one was stabilized, I had started a small LLC. I named it Clearhaven Properties. It was small. It was mine. I did not tell my family about any of this while it was happening. Not because I was hiding it, I would have answered honestly if anyone had asked. But no one asked. My mother asked about my real estate stuff in the same tone she used to ask about my college thesis, interested in a surface way, not really expecting an answer that would require her to pay attention. My father asked if I'd met anyone, meaning a man. Meaning was I building a life that looked like the one they understood. My brother Daniel, to his credit, texted me on my birthday every year and sometimes called. He asked how I was doing and I said good, and he said that was great, and that was the extent of it. I did not carry bitterness about Daniel. I want to be clear about that. He was not the one who had divided things unequally. He had not asked for $200,000 any more than I had asked, to be handed $1,000 and a comment about my self-sufficiency. He was just the one who had fit the shape of what my parents wanted, and I was the one who hadn't, and neither of us had chosen that. I spent a long time being angry at the wrong person before I understood that. The anger needed somewhere to go, and for a while it went toward Daniel because he was the visible symbol of everything that felt unfair. But Daniel was not the architect of that unfairness. He had just lived inside it, the same way I had, in a different room. By the time I was 32, Clearhaven had 8 units under management, and I had brought on a part-time property manager named Deb, who was competent and reliable in a way that allowed me to think more than 6 weeks ahead for the first time in 2 years. My net worth, actual, calculated, not approximate, had crossed a number that would have seemed fictional to me the night I sat in my parents' bathroom and had my quiet breakdown on the edge of the tub. I did not think about telling my parents. I did not wake up planning for a moment when they would see it. I had stopped organizing my life around their perception of it, and that had turned out to be one of the most important things I had ever done. It freed up an enormous amount of energy, the energy I had spent for years trying to be seen, trying to be acknowledged, trying to fit into the story they had already decided to tell about me. When I stopped trying to rewrite that story for them, I found I had enough energy to write an entirely different one for myself. The moment happened anyway. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and I was driving back from Millhaven after meeting with a commercial tenant who was interested in the ground floor space in a new building I'd acquired on the edge of the town square. I was tired in the specific good way that comes from a productive day, the kind of tired that feels like something rather than nothing. I stopped for gas about 40 minutes outside of the city. My phone rang. It was my mother. This was not unusual, but the timing of her calls usually had a pattern: Sunday afternoons, or when something was happening with Daniel. A Thursday evening was outside the pattern. "Claire," she said, and something in her voice was different. Not upset. Not concerned. Something I couldn't place. "Hey, Mom. What's up?" I was talking to Connie Marsh today. Connie Marsh was a woman my mother had known for 20 years, a member of her book club, someone she had coffee with on alternating Wednesdays. She mentioned something, and I just wanted to call. I waited. She said her son is trying to lease a space in Millhaven. He's opening a second location for his restaurant. And she mentioned the building on the square, and she said the management company that owns it is called Clearhaven Properties. A pause. She looked them up. She showed me the website. I stood at the gas pump and watched the numbers climb and said nothing. "Claire, is that your company?" "Yes," I said. The silence that came next was long enough that I could hear her breathing. "Connie said it's a beautiful building," she said finally. Her voice was doing something I had never heard it do before. Not quite breaking. Something more controlled than that, but working against itself. She said the whole restoration is she said it's remarkable. "Perry did good work," I said. "And we had a good team." "I didn't know," my mother said. "I didn't know it had gotten to. I didn't know what you were building." I thought about saying something then. I had the words available. I had been carrying some version of them for a long time. The speech I had rehearsed in the car on that 4-hour drive home from the barbecue. The things I had wanted to say in the kitchen when she handed me a compliment instead of a check. All of it was right there. Accessible. Ready. But standing at a gas pump on a Thursday evening, I found that they no longer had the same urgency they once did. The anger that had fueled the first 2 years had burned clean somewhere in the middle of it all, and what was left was not warmth exactly, but something quieter. Something like the feeling of standing in a room you have built yourself, knowing every beam and every nail, knowing what it cost. "You could have asked," I said. "That's all. You could have asked," she said. "I know." That was all she said. She didn't explain herself. She didn't make excuses about Daniel, or about how they'd worried about her own choices, or about how they'd wanted to protect what they had. She just said, "I know." And I believed that she did. I believed that in that moment, standing wherever she was standing with her phone and her book club friend's revelation, she understood something she had not let herself understand before. Whether that understanding would last, whether it would change anything, whether it would translate into something different between us going forward, I didn't know. I still don't know, fully. Some things take longer to find out than a single phone call. We stayed on the phone a little longer. She asked if I would come for Thanksgiving. I said I thought so. She said she would like that. Before we hung up, she said, "I'm proud of you, Claire." It was the first time in my memory that she had said those words to me in that direct, unqualified way. Not "I always knew you'd be fine" or "you were always so capable," but just simply that. No cushion around it, no qualifier, just the words, plain, offered across the line. I didn't know what to do with it in that moment. I said, "Thank you." I got in my car. I sat there for a minute before I started the engine. I was not sure I had forgiven her. I was not sure that was the right word for what I was doing, or what I was going to do. Forgiveness is a process and not a moment, and I had learned that about most things, that they don't resolve cleanly into before and after, that the story keeps going even when it feels like it should end. What I knew in that moment, sitting in a parking lot in the early dark of a Thursday in October, was that I was 32 years old, and I had built something real. I had built it from $41,000, and a kind of anger that turned out to be a better foundation than anyone would have expected. I had built it in the absence of the belief I had once wanted so badly I could feel the absence of it like a physical thing. And I had built it anyway. My brother called 2 days later. He had heard from my mother, apparently. He said, "Claire? Seriously? Millhaven? That's incredible." He said it in the way that people say things when they genuinely mean them, and don't have the language to say more. and I appreciated that. I told him thank you. He asked if we could grab dinner next time I was in town, and I said yes, and I meant it. There was something uncomplicated in that call that I had not expected, a kind of ease that came from two people who had grown up in the same house and survived it in different ways, finally talking to each other without the weight of everything their parents had built between them. I want to tell you something, because I know some of you listening to this are in the place I was. The place where you are the one who figures things out, the one who doesn't need help, the one whose independence is described as a gift by the people who were supposed to give you a different kind of gift and didn't. I want to tell you that the anger is not the problem. The anger is information. The anger is telling you that something was not right and that you know it and that you deserve to know it. The problem is only when the anger becomes the destination instead of the fuel. When you are doing everything just to prove something to people who may never fully see it, that's when it costs you more than it gives you. At some point, somewhere in the second year, I stopped building Clearhaven for them. I stopped rehearsing the moment they would understand. I built it because I was good at it, because it mattered, because the work itself had become the thing I wanted. That shift, quiet, unannounced, not a decision so much as a realization, was the one that actually changed everything. You cannot build something lasting on a foundation of needing to be seen. You can only build something lasting on a foundation of knowing why the work itself matters. You don't need them to hand you the $200,000. You don't need to wait for the barbecue where someone claps you on the shoulder and says, "This is what we do for family." You can build what you need to build with what you have. It will be harder. It will take longer. You will spend some time in a parking lot at a gas station in the dark, wondering if you made the right choice. And the answer is that you will never know for certain, and you have to keep going anyway. That is not a comfort exactly. But it is the truth, and I would rather have the truth than something easier that turns out to be nothing. I am telling you this from an office in a building I own. There is a window and it faces south, and in the mornings the light comes through it and lands on the wall in a way that I have come to think of as mine. Not the light. I don't own the light. But the angle of it, the particular way it falls at 8:15 on a clear morning, the specific feeling of sitting in that chair with that coffee and knowing that every decision that led to this moment was one I made myself, that feeling is mine. Nobody handed it to me. Nobody could. Everything I can see from this window, I built. You can build too. You probably already know how. You've been learning your whole life, in all the ways they didn't mean to teach you. The self-sufficiency they praised you for because it was convenient for them, it is yours now. It has always been yours. And you can use it for yourself, entirely, and without apology, for the rest of your life. Thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs it. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Drop your city. Tell me what part of this landed with you. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.